Hi. So we're going to get started. Welcome to the Hollywood Masterclass. How many of you have been to this panel before? Thank you. Okay, so you know what to expect. This is an amazing panel. I've gotten to know all of these individuals. They are at the top of their game, and you are going to be thrilled by what they have to share with you today. So let's start off with Julie Lawrence, who's the creative executive at Playtone. Julie has worked on a few little movies like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, the John Adams miniseries, Big Love, Band of Brothers, Olive Kitteridge, The Pacific, Charlie Wilson's War, and Mamma Mia. So she's been working with that company for how many years?
17 years.
17 years. That's longer than most Hollywood marriages. Leslie Wills is a creative executive at Get Lifted Film Company. That's John Legend's company. She's worked on the series Underground, which is amazing. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it. South Side with You, Southern Rights, and Neil Brennan's Three Mics. Next to Leslie is Jessica Paveo, who's Director of Development in Television for Trepas Studios. They currently have Overboard in the theaters, and previously starring Eugenio Derbez is How to Be a Latin Lover. Don Hanfield is CEO and president of Motor. He's created and produces the series Nightfall, gave us the movie about McDonald's founder, did Throwaways and The Rift, which is a graphic novel. Lydia Porto is currently starring on Get Shorty. The amazing thing about Lydia's acting skills is I had known her for about 4 years. We DVR'd the entire first season of Get Shorty, and I didn't know it was her. Swear to God. She's been on Horrible Bosses 2, Scary Movie, and the picture in the lower left-hand corner is the character she plays, which she'll tell you more about. And then who the hell am I? I've been around forever. These are vintage credits, so I put a vintage picture of myself up there. While my kids were growing up, I was the associate publisher of Creative Screenwriting Magazine and co-coordinator of Screenwriting Expo for the first 5 years. Since then, I've developed a mobile platform called Clixit, which I hope that you will all soon be addicted to. And I just finished writing a project for Stan Lee's POW, which is his company after Marvel. So let's start by explaining, what does a creative executive do? Jessica, why don't you take the first one?
Sure, I'll jump in. So, creative executive, whether it's at a production company, which all of us are at, or a studio or network, it means you're sort of the project manager, both creatively and, admin, dirty jobs, everything in between, to get something off the ground. So, specifically on the production company side, you're sourcing IP. That could be, a book, an idea, a piece of talent, a writer, a world, and you're matching it with writers, packaging it up so that you can ultimately kind of bring it up the chain, studio, network, and beyond. So you're the beginning and ending sort of driving force on every project. The overview.
I would, just to piggyback off Jessica, I would say that, I'm the creative gatekeeper of my company, where the bad stuff shouldn't get through me and the good stuff should. And then once we get into that process, it's about, harnessing relationships with the writers or producers, and sometimes that's, it takes months, weeks, or years, and just working with the creative team to manifest that idea into, what we see on screen and TV and stage.
Well, yeah, it's a wonderful job because we do get to see a lot of wonderful material, and we read a lot of books, we read a lot of articles, we do a lot of reading, but it's wonderful to create the relationships with the writers and the people who bring us this material. But yeah, and also trying to anticipate what our bosses are looking for, what the companies that we have relationships are looking for. And sometimes it's heartbreaking where we have a wonderful piece of material, but it's just not what we're looking for at that time. So it is a little bit tricky to deal with material that we personally love, but that may not have a life with our particular company. So.
Don, why don't you start by telling us how you articulate the mandate of your company?
Well, my company is now focused a lot on IP creation and IP development, so originating IP as much as possible, controlling as much of the IP as possible, which we've been doing through developing comic books or creating YA novels, and all that stuff has kind of been the focus the last few years. I don't know if people know, but when the WGA was formed, screenwriters specifically had to give up copyright. The only creatives that had to give up copyright. So one of the things we're focused on is just, not just for the company, but for writers, is giving them a way to sort of retain a piece of their copyright as they move things into film and television production.
You're the hero of writers everywhere. How about the rest of you? How do you articulate the mandate of your company?
I am an actor, and a lot of times we're the last ones to be hired, so a few years ago I decided I was also a studio head. But I guess, because I think of myself as also constantly looking for projects that might be good for me, projects that I can usher along, even though I'm not associated with a corporation. But projects do come through, and I think that more and more, especially with the access to online platforms that we have, actors are also very much moving into the creative space and thinking of themselves not only as waiting for the next great script to come, but generating possibly that script, or at least being on the lookout for properties that might be good for us, because Get Shorty's hopefully going to last a long time, but we all know it won't last forever. So I'm interested in who's going to be writing the script that's going to be ready to go 2 years from now, 3 years from now, that kind of thing. And I feel like that perspective is becoming more the kind of perspective that a lot of us have, and how I look at things. So I always have, like, right now I'm working with a female producer and a writer to write something that's very tailored to something that I want to do as a director, and I keep tabs on who those creative people are. So,
Julie, how about you? And can everybody move their microphone
Oh,
really close
yeah.
to their mouth? So
hello.
do that rock star thing,
We have a fairly specific mandate, although, we're open to all things, and I'm sure we would all say that we're material-driven, character-driven, and all that. But, Playtone, Tom and Gary are always very interested in things that have a historic nature to them, true stories. Obviously, a lot of times reality is so much more fascinating and interesting than things that can be created. But we love human dramas within a historic background, so we tend to have a specific mandate, but we also do like to sort of try to step out of that box as much as possible. We have an amazing relationship with HBO, a long-standing relationship with HBO, so our historic miniseries, are really the sort of things that are closest to our hearts, but we do like looking at more fun and lighter material as well, obviously, with things like Mamma Mia and My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and we just thought they were really fun stories, and really amazing characters. So in a sense, we do have a bit of a mandate in that we, are always going to be interested, and I should never say this because we always say no more World War II projects, but there's just a limitless amount of human fascinating stories within that arena. So we are a little bit specific in that we like historic things, but we are open to other genres as well.
But you currently have, 217 World War II movies in project?
It feels like it. And just when we say no more, another great story falls in our lap. And so, yeah, we try to veer away from that as much as we can. But
Thank you for your service.
they keep pulling us back. And no, we will always be interested in that era.
Lydia, when does the actor enter this process?
Well, as some of these executives can tell you with Tom Hanks' company, and some of them enter the project very much at the beginning if they've But a lot of times in production, we're almost the last ones to be called, which is why I always encourage myself and my colleagues to write as well, because I feel like you can also initiate the project from the very beginning by writing for yourself, writing in your own voice. Sometimes that can lead to something that's actually produced, but if nothing else, it can help you define your brand as an actor, what your place in the acting community is, what kind of characters you really resonate with. So I try to alternate because I feel like as an actor, I'm often the last one to be called. Whenever I'm not acting, I try to be writing or creating something from the beginning.
Leslie,
Yes.
how does your company choose writers? And how do they choose directors for a project? Because those are typically the two key ones to start.
We choose writers and directors, ones that we followed throughout our career that we love, who we feel like haven't gotten a shot, whether it's because of lack of diversity or just a lack of opportunity. We have an agency, but we don't always rely on them, as we know that they have their own kind of objective. So it's just reading. Everyone, most of our job is just reading, and forming our taste in that way. Also, life is too short, so even sometimes we have this great writer who may be a little difficult to deal with. We will choose the next option. But really, we don't just go by script. If we read a script, we'll love it, but we also sit down with writers to see if we have the same synergy, if we have the same kind of like the same idea. Sometimes we will have a great idea, but we don't see on the same page. So we go in that way. We do love working with people that we know. So I know, like our family from Underground, we tend to try to make projects together all the time because we were in the trenches together. We know what that experience and what their talents are. So a lot of times we will do projects with like Anthony Hemingway, who is an amazing director. But we really go off of instinct. We don't always choose by looks that people get about the amount of volume that is attracting or what the buzz is, because a lot of times that rises to the top, and you realize a lot of times it has been vetted. So I guess the answer is we do a lot of work. We do a lot of research, and we will look through Twitter accounts for years to make sure you didn't say anything wrong. We do some pretty deep diving.
I'm really glad to hear that, because it's better to know beforehand than find out surprises.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I recently was pitched a writer from our agency, I will not name, but in one of the databases, Variety Insight, which is like an IMDb Pro for industry, it will kind of populate the most recent Variety article with that person's name in it. Sometimes the search is off, but usually it's the right one, and there was just something that, was not, it reminded me, oh, that's that person that I had heard this thing about, and not to kind of only spiral on rumors, but it was something where I was like, that's probably not a road we want to go down.
No, you don't want those type of tweets to resurface right before box office, to come out right before.
But to build off what you were saying, I think it's, there are several different ways that the writers can come to you, whether it's an existing relationship, your representatives, agencies, managers, either your own team or otherwise, or through, staffing on your projects, et cetera. But ultimately, like you said, it's either it's on the page or it's not. You've got the sort of chemistry with the person or not, and you can kind of see the staying power, and creatively you can all be on the same page and think you can remain on the same page, because projects take years, and if you can't stay passionate about the idea and the team, there's not going to be anything to propel it. You need that force the entire time. So in choosing whether it's a writer, director, et cetera, it's got to be someone you don't mind being on a road trip with, you don't mind being stuck, having lunch with every day, you don't mind tackling problems together. It's someone you've got to be able to see that through line with.
And someone who will do the work.
Yes.
Who will not be tired by the second draft, or who's willing to hear the notes and can kind of take those notes for sure.
what's that process like, talking to a writer about notes? I know what it's like on this side of the table. So tell me your perspective.
Well, no.
For me, and it's something that I'm still working on in my career. Because writers are so different each case, case by case. So what I do, since they're so different, I try to be consistent about my delivery. So I know it's very accustomed to put all the flattery on the end as until we fade into the notes, but I just kind of like, look, let's just jump into this. And, I try to make them feel comfortable. Like, no matter what I say, the intention is for us to get to, to get to the goal and make the perfect script. I always tell writers, these are my notes. Please give your notes about my notes so that they, know that this is a creative collaboration. And yeah, I love writers with opinions who will kind of push back in that process. And always give written. I always, what I love to do is kind of talk through the notes and then follow up with written, which I think which is a custom process.
Yeah, we do the same.
Just to speak to that, I'm a writer and give notes. And actually, as a writer, I was initially early in my career, I had all my friends were kind of indie film auteurs. So when I started writing for the studio, I had no idea how to take notes, and I was pretty awful at it. And then when I started giving people notes and realized what it was like to be in the room with myself, I called some executives and apologized. So I learned a lot by also since I still write and still give notes, you still get that pain of, oh man, they didn't like something I did. So that's a reminder when you deliver the package to another writer to sort of try to be kinder and gentler. But, I think everyone in this business is a company, whether they have a company or not, and they have to treat their business like it's a company, and they have to develop for themselves like they would develop for a company. And one of the things you spoke about is how you choose projects. And I think anyone should choose a project by something about it thematically that speaks to them. And plot, when you do plot, you come up with good ideas. I've come up with plenty of good ideas that 3 years later, I'm like, oh my God, I'm spending all this time on what was a good idea 3 years ago that I don't really believe in. I don't really like this project. It's just, but now I'm like committed. I'm doing all this work on it that I don't really give a crap about, pardon my language. But when there's a theme or something at the nugget of it that you understand, that you really care about, whether it's dealing with loneliness or it's speaking about end of life, or it's about human rights. There's something about that you really care about. Then, even if the script comes in crappy, the writer didn't deliver, you still believe in that core element of it. You're still going to want to push through it. If it's a great idea, and then you get a bad script and you don't care about it, it's just going to die. So.
And I think you need that on the selling side to keep what you're saying, keep the fire going. But on the buyer side, they also want to hear it. I pitched this morning a kid's show, and typically at the top of a pitch, producers will typically introduce sort of why it speaks to them, why this is important, why they want to be a part of this. And we did that and set it up at the top. And at the end, the execs came back and kind of individually re-asked us what our connection was to the idea and to the project, and wanted to know our cultural heritages, because it was a diverse cast for a kid's show and what that meant. And it was just so interesting that they wanted to deep dive. Mostly execs, when you're done, they're like, see ya. So it was really interesting to see that they kind of cared to know how we each individually, and not even just the writers versus the producers, connected to the idea. I thought it was really refreshing.
So, percentage-wise, I want to build on that. How much of the decisions of the trajectory of your development slate are emotional, and how much of them are driven by the finances of the business market?
Well, I think for Playtone, it's not as financially driven. Some of our decisions, obviously, we have relationships that everyone wants to make money, and we want to make everyone happy. But for us, it's I would say, gosh, the percentage. It's a pretty high percentage that we have to feel very strongly about the material, and we have to really love it. As you said, it's a long journey to get a project, made and created and released, and you have to sort of really love it all the way. And if we have learned, if we don't, then it doesn't turn out well. So I would say it's a really high percentage, for us.
I would also add that emotions work both ways. One of the lessons I've learned also being an executive is that sometimes emotions can work against you. You have a team of people that are all trying to make, and this is probably the biggest lesson as a writer, when I'm working with a writer and I'm trying to get the script better, it's we're the champions of that project. Once the writer delivers, we have to go out to everyone and go, this is great, we really love this. And if the writer doesn't listen to the notes, and then I send it to an agent, and the agent gives me the same note back, then the project has suffered, not your own personal reputation has suffered. But every time I've sent something out that I didn't think was ready, that the writers sort of pushed back on, it sort of felt that way. But so you want to keep the producers emotionally invested by making them feel like you really listen to them. And look, I've worked with great writers that they don't take the notes, but they give me like an essay back on the notes that's like, not like you're wrong, but just like, here's why I did what I did. And it's absolutely enlightening, because then it's a constructive collaboration and not just a, no, I'm not doing that. And just keeping them excited is just as important as being excited yourself, I guess.
And to kind of talk about that and what you guys were talking about with writers earlier, there's a little bit of like the Neo thing in the Oracle, where there's what you want to get from them and the direct way to tell them what you want, and sometimes you need to tell them the thing that's going to get what you want instead of telling them directly what you want. So there's this very, it happens in relationships, it happens in everything, where it's like, what is the thing that I can say or do to get what I need out of this person? And sometimes it isn't that sort of straight line. I didn't like this because, make this better. What is the thing that's actually going to bring it full circle? You're not the one, So you can rise above and like deliver on that.
That may be the best analogy I've ever heard to give me that, seriously. So this is primarily Don, because I know you've worked in all of the spectrums of theatrical, TV, streaming, new media. But all of you, how do you decide where a project should go? Should it be broadcast? Should it be cable? Should it be Netflix? How do you decide?
I mean, personally, obviously you want to go where it can live, and there's different places for that. But more and more now, me personally, and where my company's focused is less about the end distributor and more about the creation of the property in some form that we can retain some kind of ownership or stake in. So, again, I've been doing a lot of comic book stuff lately, and am starting a label for comics for other writers. Writers have seen what I've done, and they've come to me and want to do that. So I'm doing more of that. But it's once you have the property, it's alive. A screenplay is a blueprint for a building that may not be built, whereas a comic book or a book is actually an end product. So it's out in the world. And, in 20 years, I've probably written or developed 50, 60, how many projects, and how many of those have seen the light of the day? A very, very small iceberg, tip of the iceberg percentage. So, and once it's alive, it's just, presenting a script to someone, their eyes glaze over because they have a stack of scripts this big, but if you give them someone a book that's gotten good reviews or gotten published, or a comic book that they can just flip through and read, it's just easier to get people's attention, which is really hard now at every level, so.
Anyone else?
Who will buy it, who will see its vision. I think we try not to, as long as we know that it's in it fits a spectrum of having a home, we try not to let that lead the creative. We always want to create the best project possible and then kind of see where that fits. But, you can't do it so blindly that there's no home for it. You couldn't have done, I don't know, the choose your own adventure shows that, let's say, Netflix is doing for kids now. You couldn't have sold that 10 years ago, pre-Netflix. So you've got to always know there's a path, but not let them dictate what it is, because they don't know. Until that great idea, sometimes they don't even know what the possibility is. So you kind of just push yourself to service the project and then find its home.
Julie,
Yes.
this is a little bit of a personal question, but it kind of is one of those things we all aspire to. You have spent 17 years working with an amazing company that anybody here would not like to spend 17 years with Playtown, right? Zero hands. How do you sustain a fresh insight and enthusiastic momentum when you are going to the same place every day with the same people, albeit with different projects? What is that magic that happens there?
It all comes from the top. It all comes from Tom and Gary. They are just wonderful people. They're wonderful to work with. They're very collaborative. We have all been there for so long. We're a very small group. They have always been very just understanding with all of us. If people are interested in a specific project, we don't divide things up. We don't have someone who reads this and someone who reads that. And we all read everything. And there's always been that atmosphere of inclusion with all, that we're all in it together. We don't really have titles. I told Tom I was the director of development, and he said, okay. So, there's, again, we're a very small group. There's only a few of us in development. And we're just all sort of in it together, and we feel like we've been there for ages. But again, it all comes from them being wonderful people and wonderful bosses, and they're both just very inspiring. They both have the same energy that I think they've had when they started. You know, they come in all the time. They're really excited about projects, and you know, it's catching. We can't help but join them in their, you know, excitement. So.
On the other end of the spectrum, this is for Leslie, because you've worked for Will and Jada, who do some very important, serious projects, and now you're working for John Legend, who does some very important, serious projects. And in between, you worked for Comedy Central. So, point of personal privilege, because I have a brain crush on John Oliver. Is he really like a nice guy?
Really nice.
Now for everybody else. How do you shift your thinking of projects from one to the next? Because when you're working for someone like Will and Jada, I would assume you get to know all the serious, important writers, and then you go to Comedy Central, and it's like a whole new shift from left brain to right brain. How does that work?
There's the 12-year-old boy in me, and then and then there's, you know, the black female that works with Will and Jada. You know, it was actually really easy. You know, Will and Jada didn't always, at least the time that I was working for them, they did serious things, but they were also, their slate was very diverse and covered rom-coms to kids. You know, they had Jaden and Willow, who were really big. I mean, you know, at the time, Jaden was Karate Kid, so we were really looking in the adolescent space, so that was fun. It was really an easy kind of switch because I watched Comedy Central. I watched everything Viacom. I loved The Drunk History. I loved Key and Peele. I loved South Park. So it was, you know, for me, it was just like the real Leslie coming to work, and I could, you know, Will and Jada are very specific brands. So, you know, there were certain things that we weren't going to work on. There were certain approaches they wouldn't take because, you know, their brand would suffer if they took the Comedy Central route. So it was, I would say it was a very easy pivot for me to kind of switch.
Lydia, on the other hand now, you're a sole practitioner. Every morning you wake up and you are your business, and every night you go to bed and you're your business. How does that impact the separation of, kind of like the separation of church and state, from Lydia the woman and Lydia the business? How does that work?
In different stages of my career, it's worked in different ways. There was a time when I worked from home, but yet when it was 5 o'clock, I would be like, okay, this office is closed, no more business for the day. When I was raising my child, especially, those lines had to be very clearly drawn. Now for example, I just finished my shooting for the second season of Get Shorty, and I had a friend who's a producer who had gotten some money for us to do a short film last year, but we couldn't ever agree on the script that we were given. We went through several sessions with the script writer and really, you know, couldn't come to an agreement. So we sort of had that in the back pocket, and I just met a young Colombian director. I just saw her first short film, which was sold to Netflix. She wants to settle here in Los Angeles. My cousin happens to be friends with her mom. And I said, hey, you know, we've got this idea. I want to explore this as a director. She wants to explore this as an actor. We've got this cinematographer who's got these toys he wants to play with. You think you could come up with a story that could tie all those things in? And she sent me a first rough draft last night. So sometimes it's just an opportunity that presents itself. And I try to go in waves, you know, to make sure that I have enough downtime to recharge myself and also take advantage of if I'm acting now and I really have to focus on Get Shorty, other things have to maybe go into the background, but they're ready to resurface once the season's shooting is over. So at this point, it's not so much a time in the day, it's more like a season of the year. There are things that I like to do seasonally and always spend some time writing. When I have downtime, I try to get away for at least a week and do nothing but writing, because I find like in the first 3 days, I'm still kind of turning a lot of wheels, but about day 3 or day 4, it just comes out. And a lot of times what I've written in that week or two that I get away is material for the next year or the next 2 years, or at least if an opportunity comes up, like with the web series, which I got inspired to do after attending Digital Hollywood and seeing the different models. I picked one that I thought would work for me, and I wrote all these scripts a couple of years ago and then did a short film. The cinematographer liked me. She had a weekend available. We shot the pilot. With that pilot, I can show things. I've then developed like short stories based on those scripts, and that material just keeps giving and giving. So I do try to get away at least once a year and do just solid writing for a week or two.
Okay. I want to shift topics, and occasionally when I need clarity on a subject, I will look for wisdom through Hunter S. Thompson. Thank you for knowing why that's funny.
Which our showrunner, Davey Holmes, is developing a series about on Epix. Sorry, I had to mention that.
On the topic of the television business, he says, the TV business is uglier than most things. A cruel and shallow money trench. A long plastic hallway where thieves and pimps run free and good men die like dogs. I have worked on many of those shows. When it comes to the topic of integrity, Hollywood gets a really bum rap. But everybody up here works for a company that puts integrity first on some level. So how does that happen? Is it work? Is it effortless? Is there any consciousness to the process?
I could maybe talk about that a little bit in the sense that, I mean, I'm not, of course, a corporation, and there's a lot of situations that I have, or I can feel very powerless about. But I think if you start with integrity, if I start with just knowing where I stand, what's important to me, at least the projects that I generate that come through that funnel. I have, for example, developed over the years this philosophy that I'd rather assemble a team of people I like to work with and find a project we can work on together, rather than sort of associating with someone because I think that I might be able to get something from them, because that relationship doesn't have the integrity that a real friendship has. So I have like this creative consortium or whatever that I keep around me, and we've collaborated many times over the years, and it becomes effortless because we just kind of know each other and we can pop in and out of projects together. We know how we work together. So I guess when I talk about integrity, it really has to begin with me, and then to be able to be loyal to that and not fearful that I might lose something by not bending or whatever, but just sort of to trust that if I'm true to myself, the projects that are meant to come my way will come my way, and the projects I'm involved with will have that spirit, because I won't go forward if it doesn't, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and some of us, know that our companies obviously are represented by a person that everyone knows and has specific ideas about. So even though, our companies are not that person, we do have to sort of keep in mind that brand of that person and their name, and is it something that would sort of be in line with representing who they are or who people perceive them to be? So that is a little bit of a consideration in the back of our mind when I'm looking at things. I do have to sort of consider that the company is represented by one person that people have a specific idea about. And how far would we want that to go away from their idea of who that person is?
Okay, this one is for Leslie, Jessica, and Lydia, basically, because I'd like to know what you think about the tone of content on screen and how it impacts the perception of diverse communities.
The tone?
Yeah, for example, I'm watching Empire and Star regularly, and I'm sitting here thinking, this cannot be good for eliminating stereotypes.
Oh, got it.
Okay, and yet I'm totally sucked in. We DVR the shows and we'll watch 2 and 3 at a time sometime because it's well-written, compelling drama. But is there an ancillary impact, especially at this very divisive time in our socio-political environment, are these shows adversely impacting diversity?
I think so. I'm sure Lydia can speak volumes to that on the acting side as well. But so as our company focuses on Latin-leaning content, On the English language side, it's for general market, but again, with some Latin or diverse element. That could be the writer, the world, the IP, something where we can say, if you look at Jane the Virgin or you look at the Menu Project, those aren't solely for the communities that those lead actors represent. They're for everyone. But I know so many women have found, women of color found extra connectivity through the lens of those actors and their roles. So for us, we look at what's being done, and without shaming any shows, because I watch and like these shows, if someone came in and pitched us Narcos or Orange is the New Black, I'm not sure that we would take that on today, because although they're great shows, they're not, for us to watch our acting community and say, Lydia, I've got this great show for you, we're so thrilled, and you're going to play a prison inmate. That's just, it's tough for us to kind of keep that narrative up. I'm not saying that we will never do it, but that's kind of when we see that tonally existing, we think it's been done, and we can challenge ourselves to beat it and find something more aspirational.
I think that's for Get Lifted, that's where our integrity comes in a little bit, because we feel responsible. Like again, like you guys said, I have my trash TV, which I think is gold. And for us, we do lean into projects that are representative of Black and Brown experience. We like to say universal experiences that are universally represented. That's really what our mandate is. But because we see so many representations out there that we feel like are kind of going against at least the common people that we know, we do like to answer that with another form of representation. Like just a perfect example, like you said, I don't think that we would do Orange is the New Black specifically because John speaks very much about the prison system and the kind of flawed judicial system. So for us, he knows so many other real, tangible stories, really heartbreaking stories, and so Orange is the New Black just totally wouldn't fit with what we have learned about the judicial system. But I do think, I don't like to bash certain shows because there is a version of just entertaining. It is about entertaining, and sometimes, especially for Black production companies, there's a lot of pressure on us to only put out the Martin Luther Kings or the very shiny representations of us, but we love to play conflicted roles. We like to be complex characters. I think, there's a version, talking about specifically about the Black experience, and based on the submissions we get, we realize there's a version of, there's what Black people think there's what we think Black people do or how Black people live, but then we know how they actually do, so it's our responsibility to kind of put that out there.
Yeah. And you don't want to overcorrect, right? It's
Right,
not like,
exactly.
This is like the perfect person who has no flaws
Right.
and no mistakes. You want to go in and find the granular shades to make them feel real and compelling.
there's so
just
many
like you do
shades.
for your white characters.
Right.
Don, it looked like you were going to say something?
Me? Oh, no, I have nothing to add. I know, I gotta say something. One thing I would say is just, as a white kid who grew up in sort of a poor neighborhood, and every day after school I would watch The Jeffersons, Good Times, all those shows. In some ways, we're delivering medicine, and the medicine is sort of to expose people to other cultures and have more humanity. So sometimes even shows that may, on the surface, look like they're not contributing, if they're getting people to step into a culture that they wouldn't normally step into and accept it, then maybe they're serving a purpose.
Yeah.
So, Jessica, it was just announced that you're working with the same team from Overboard to do the next film.
Yes.
Are there advantages to doing that, and how much of that was involved with the idea that they got your brand and they got your star talent?
I think you nailed it right there. It's part of what we talked about earlier with finding talent that you think creatively you link up, emotionally you link up, you can tolerate each other, all of that. It was very simpatico among, Eugenio, Ben, Rob, and Bob, and we know they can deliver. We know that their humor and Eugenio's humor have found, kind of a common ground place. And it's hard to find writers these days also, coupled if it ain't broke, don't fix it. To a certain extent, we certainly like to open up, experiences to different writers and different conversations, but there is something to, knowing that something can work, because it is so hard in this business, and particularly TV and film, but particularly TV, there are more shows than have ever been, And so most writers have things in second, third, fourth position. I know someone who just was, I think, put their staffing behind his third position to development, 2 development projects. That wouldn't have happened 5-10 years ago. So in this this merry-go-round of trying to catch the right writer for your idea at the right time when they're available, if you've got lightning in a bottle, I think you just hold on.
So this is actually for Don. Okay, I didn't mention it when I was introducing you, but you did a film called Throwaways
Yeah.
about hacking culture. And it was the most accurate representation of hackers that I've ever seen. And I can say that because I spend time at hackathons among hackers. And you don't, though, do you? So,
One of my best friends growing up, when he was 18 years old, the FBI actually started scouting him when he was 17, and they were waiting for him to turn 18 so they could try him as an adult. And they broke down his door, and he had been breaking into the Pentagon computer regularly, and they charged him with 60 felonies, and they actually thought he was running a spy ring with his mom. And when they saw his notebooks, he'd broken into the Kremlin and all these other places, and they said, "Can you get us in?" And he said, "Yeah, but you have to pay me." And he's now multi-millionaire. He lives in Atlanta, and when I was shooting Kill the Messenger, I reconnected with him, and he would tell me all these crazy stories, and I was like, oh my God, this is a movie. Now, with the Throwaways in particular, that was initially intended to be probably more on the Mr. Robot spectrum, but we shot that with Crackle, and they're a great company. They were kind of new at the time, and they sent us to Bulgaria with a production company that was, they had done Bikini Death Island 3 and Bikini Death Island 4, and so we went in there to try to make this, and when I got there, I was like, this has to be sort of a comedy, because otherwise we're going to try to hit a bar we'll never hit. And, I rewrote a lot of the locations to be in Bulgaria, but that was our first foray into television. That was sort of supposed to be a backdoor pilot, but anything in there that's authentic came directly from both the research that Michael Ross, who was the original writer we had, who did a great job. He had a famous hacker, helping him with stuff, and then I had my buddy Chris, who's just the stories he tells me, I always move my phone. Actually, when I was shooting Kill the Messenger, the founder, I went over to his house, and he was like, "What are you doing on Saturday?" I'm like, "We're not shooting, man. What are you doing?" He's like, "Why don't you come over, man? We'll hack into a Syrian general's computer and cover it with naughty pictures he can't get off." And I was like, "That's his Saturday." So yeah, it's but
He's listening right now.
yeah, he probably is. Yeah. Hi, Chris.
But the key is it's that kind of authenticity that makes something really pop. And, the Throwaways as a title is ironic because it's definitely not a throwaway film. It's on Crackle. Everybody can watch it.
Cool. I'm glad you dug it.
You ought to watch it. Now, what I want to ask is, what is the industry getting right about the African American and Latino community? And how can we promote more of that in our content, whether it's big screen, small screen, streamed? What are they getting right?
Well,
Besides your character not
no.
being right.
Well, I don't know if my character's right or wrong. There's a point at which I thought, I'm an actor, not an activist. I'll do the best to play this part, and the society can decide what it means. Or, even though I have worked with a PhD who studied the effects of entertainment on education, so I've looked at that very closely, and I know probably is being affected. But with the question that you asked, the thing that comes to mind is when my friend Ruman Kazi, who is Muslim and has auditioned for, as you can imagine, so many terrorists or whatever, who gets so excited and calls me and says, "I got asked to audition for a guy named Steve. He's just Steve. He's just a guy." I think that maybe what we aspire to is to be accepted. We're American. We're here. We're not that different or that special, in the sense that we're human beings, we have human experiences, and so it would be nice that, to not have the Muslim guy is always the terrorist, but maybe the guy who takes your order at the subway is also Muslim, or the Latino is always the maid. Well, maybe the yoga instructor is also Latina or whatever. Sometimes even in scripts that describe background, the tendency is to cast all of the background in a certain ethnicity, unless the writer, I'm on the diversity committee for the SAG-AFTRA union, and I know that some writers in Solidarity will actually describe their background and say there's 3 African American women in the background and 2 Latino guys, because sometimes in casting they won't even think to cast the background in a diverse way. And I'm sensitive to that. I go to the movie and I go, how is it that everybody in New York right now is Caucasian and there's
Right.
white? There's no, like, you know what I mean? Everybody on the street, everybody in the shops, everybody watching this, everybody's white. How does that happen? I never see that when I go to New York. So I guess it's like, what is success? You know, getting to audition for a guy named Steve, you know, and just to be a guy, to be a person.
Yeah.
I think,
Everyone wants to be Steve.
I think one of the things that I've noticed that they're really getting right is putting the money and the budgets behind projects. And that is, from the start, as far as script and development, particularly in P&A and marketing, which is really important because there are a lot of times that films will get made, but because they're not, so to the masses, no one knows about them. And so box office is weak, and they use that as argument to not do a sequel or to keep it going. I love that people are interested in letting own cultures write their own stories. That is something that I've really noticed, like when studios say, hey, we've got this film about, a young black kid in Harlem, we want a black writer, or we're looking for a black director. We were going to send them a list of nothing but black writers and directors anyway, but it was awesome, that they're like, look, we are looking for diversity. We only want a certain look. So I do feel that they are letting black and brown and other telling their own stories, and that they're actually putting the funds behind it to do so.
Yeah. I think there's just more of an intention, and whether their intentions are driven by money because they think they'll make more if they open up to diverse voices, but
It is.
that's why it's become a thing now. But at least they're trying. If you look at what gets developed and what actually gets picked up, they're not always kind of taking that next step and putting their money where their mouth is. You can look at the, 5 or more immigration or, pilots about, or development scripts about undocumented people. I don't think any of them went this season, but, there's kind of the intention there, but they're not quite figuring out how to get to the finish line, but at least they're looking to, they're looking to John, they're looking to brands and people to say, hey, this is representative of me and my audience, and this is why you need to pay attention. But I can tell you, you need to be firing usually on all cylinders still to get them to listen. You've got to have that right writer. We've got to have our presence be strong in the room, the conversation, the theme, all of the things we've been talking about. It has to be just like a little bit better. Like you have to be like Donald Glover or Issa. You have to be writing your own, creating your own series, driving the narrative, like firing on all cylinders, like just to be heard and be like, oh, okay, we think we'll take a chance on you now. And it's like, the amount of work that people have to kind of get to be heard is unfortunate, but now at least they're starting to listen.
And you think it's changing a little bit in that people want to see the. I'm just thinking of long ago when Nia Vardalos was shopping, My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Every executive that she went to said, "Oh, this is a great story. Let's change it to make it a." They wanted to change it, and she sort of stuck to her guns. And I'm asking you all, is that happening less? Where a studio will look at something and say, "Oh, that would be great, but let's make it a different kind of
It
family."
definitely still happens. And
Yeah, I
think
get that a lot.
That's
You
our
still-
job, is to push and be like, listen, this is wrong. Can we
Yeah.
make her Mexican? It's like, well, no, she's Colombian, and there's a
Right.
reason why
Right.
that's
It's
specific
different.
to this
Yeah.
story. And why would you want to ask Issa to be like, but could you be, Issa, could you be Mexican? Like, could you be?
Yeah.
It's like, no, she's representing her Black experience in LA, so you can't shift that. So sometimes those tone deaf things still happen. Someone just told me again about it the other day. It was based on her own life, and
Wanted
and
to
she's
change it.
Colombian, and they wanted to make her Mexican because they're like, well, how can we reach a wider audience?
Right.
But people, it just but can we make her a man? Like,
Yeah.
she's struggling with womanhood, But so
That's too bad.
Each one teach one.
Yeah, for every step forward, it's a couple steps back. But I think that's like the strength of these people, of us here, is to be able to continue to advocate and push, and like when we hear no, say yes.
Right. Like for example, something that my company always talks about. We're so, Girls Trip, which was such a huge film last year, and we're like, well, when are they going to greenlight the sequel? When because it's such a sure thing, and we feel like because we feel like because it's an all-black cast and because it was, a black writer, that they are struggling to buy into that. And I think especially because they probably got the actresses at such a good rate on the first round, they know they're going to have to actually pay them what they're worth, the writers, the directors, and the talent. And so I think that that's where they're bumping. So that's where I still see that we have so much further to go, because any other film with another cast of color would have been greenlight within the second weekend.
Yeah. Plus, I also want to give a heads up to my Big Fat Greek Wedding. It gave me the ability to take my sons to the movie and say, you see, Grandpa and Uncle George aren't crazy, they're just Greek.
Yeah, can I chime in there
And
real
I
quick?
had a Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Can I chime in? My Big Fat Greek Wedding meant so much to me and my friends. We actually saw it accidentally. We went to the movies, and the movie we wanted to see was full, and we went into My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and there was like 3 of us in the theater. None of us was Greek, but we could all relate
Yeah.
to the experience. And I think that speaks a little bit to what you said too about, like, why can't we change this Colombian family into a Mexican family? I don't think you have to be Colombian to be entertained by Colombians. I've been watching Mexicans on television my entire life, and I'm totally down with Lucia Sombras and everything, Chapulín Colorado, and like, so why do we, in other words, that experience is universal, even if I'm not Greek. And I wanted to just mention that because I love that movie. It meant a lot to me too.
And that's kind of how we talk about it too. It's like you're hitting the universality right through the specificity. And I know I related to the Fresh Off the Boat pilot as a child of immigrants, and I'm not Chinese. So there were a lot of things that kind of span across different cultures that you can tap into. And I think we can, like, if you lose that, then you're losing what made it great to begin with. So it's
Absolutely.
we got to keep fighting.
And the people who stay strong and say, no, I'm not, going to change this. But it was a really fascinating to be with the company during that movie, because it was, we literally would fan out across town and go into theaters and say, please show this movie, and here's some posters, will you put these up, and we went and talked to the guy at the Grove, and it was in the farthest theater at the very, very end, the smallest little theater. And we called later on that night, and he said, oh no, we're moving it to the #1 big theater. There's lines down the, it
Yeah.
was so unbelievable how that.
All us
movie
immigrants
was
called our huge families.
just captured, the universality.
A loud family, yes.
Of a crazy family.
Which we all have. I'm going to make one prediction on the next 2 groups that are going to start moving into the diversity. It's people over 50, and it's Christians, because people never see each other on the screen unless they're evil, corrupt, feeble, or being made fun of. So my prediction is we'll be talking about at least 1 movie on either of those in the next year.
I agree
So
on the
come
50.
back.
Yeah.
I've been out of town, but book club was on
Yeah,
my list.
yeah, I must
I
say
can't
that
wait
is
to
for
see
Yeah,
it.
right?
I'm very excited.
It's going to do well. It's going to move it.
Yes.
So we're going to open it up to questions. Here are the ground rules for those of you who know me. There is no pitching. None of these people is going to take a submission or meet with you. This is the gift of information that you can use to build your own skills and career. If anyone tries to pitch, I will go 0 to bitch in 6 seconds and stop you. So, you had your hand up first, sir? We talked about streaming. We talked about how you put a project together, who you hire first. We did talk about those. We didn't use those words. I'm sorry if you didn't get what you needed. Packaging is who you put onto the team, who you hire, how you hire a writer and director, why you work with them again. Yes? Red dress, yes.
No. I mean, when we did that, I mean, I used to actually be a television producer, and the network that I helped launch was called G4, because I worked at the entertainment before then, and I was a video game nerd, and they were starting a TV network about video games, so it kind of was a natural fit. But yeah, we actually I sold a comic book. I can't announce where, but they're making it on a streaming network as a pilot. But we also had, before we sold it to TV, had made a comic book, and we sold the comic book to a video game company who's making a video game of it. So I'm a huge video game player. I still play probably too much, and and I'm always fascinated. I just got the Oculus Go. I don't know if you've used that, but that just opened up a whole new world. You can create your own virtual living room where you change the carpet and the pictures. I put my kids' pictures on the wall of this virtual living room. I'm like, I like to hang out here more than my regular living room. And I think the world is going to change to the point where you're not inviting people over to your house, you're inviting them over to your own virtual space. So as a producer, I'm always like, what is the next thing in AR? What is the next thing in VR? And I've kind of gone to traditional print first with comics and stuff like that, but I'm absolutely interested in video games in that space and interactive entertainment. I grew up reading Choose Your Own Adventures, and I watched the thing with my kids where they're watching Puss in Boots and they decide to fight the giant instead of that guy, and it's the future. And so absolutely, as a producer, I'm always thinking about that, and I'm not as tapped into it as I'd like to be, so that's something it's kind of my personal getaway, a lot of video game stuff, so kind of morphing the two worlds is something I've always thought about.
Yes, sir?
Yeah, I think maybe this question is for Leslie, Jessica, maybe respond. So one of the things I appreciate about Will Smith is that he's an African-American icon, but when you go see a movie, he just like translates across lines, right? So you can see development that I was sort of making projects that were not only black movies, but, just regular comedies with, maybe Tom Hanks or something like that, right? I felt like he was in that space. So I'm wondering, like, with John Legend or any of the other people that you've worked with, do you feel like that you're forced to stay in a certain lane because of the minority aspect, or, whether it's Jessica, who you're working for, or Lydia, maybe you have a different perspective because you're an actress. But I mean, you can develop what Tom Hanks is developing, right? But do the studios expect that from you, or do they expect you to stay in a certain lane?
Okay, let me repeat the question, concise. Does the diversity identification of the person who's running your company require that you stay in a certain lane to satisfy the networks and studios?
I think that studios and agencies and networks do have have their idea of what we are, and because we are a young company, some people can kind of dictate our brand. But when we go into the room, we make it very clear that we don't like to stay within the lines. We don't like to stay in the lanes. And because John has such a great representation and such a great character, we're very unapologetic about that mission, to where we're like, I guess no, it's, yes, there is a version of where they want us to stay, but we just go in and the first conversation is like, no, we were actually thinking this. We were, going left, and we don't want to just stay in music. We don't just do slavery. We don't just do historic, stories about the Black struggle. We do everything. So I don't know if that really answered it very well, but.
I mean, it says something more to me about the studios.
Yeah.
I call it plurality, but I just want to hear your perspective.
It's education to it, though.
I was saying, they're going to do that anyway,
Yeah.
whether it's a diversity thing, gender, et cetera. They're always going to have their mandate in their sort of box, and unless you're sort of pushing it, the envelope, that's why they feel cookie cutter, particularly broadcast. Although lately there's some, really cool and interesting things that people are doing, like This Is Us. But people are always going to want to put you in a lane because it makes you easier to sell, easier to talk. Yeah, breaking it out.
Yeah.
Okay, let's have one more question, the girl in the back. You.
I think it's more of a studio question,
Yeah.
but they do look at everything, as a package, and definitely digital. I know when I worked at the CW, because they targeted, a younger audience, as they moved into digital platforms, they wouldn't just look at the ratings, they would look at the whole package. And film studio is so driven by, where things are making money where. And so I think that definitely helps. But for a movie like that, where it's a bona fide hit, it's a little kooky. But if something, let's say, was a sleeper hit that then found an audience, post, I do think they look at that. But then because we have digital now, maybe they think, well, this did really well after the fact. Maybe it's not a theatrical release. Maybe this is a direct-to-digital release. So I do think it shapes both, like, doing another, the sequel, et cetera, and also where it lives, because now there's just so many options.
Can I chime in on this question a little bit? I found it interesting when we started working for Get Shorty, which is, of course, Epix, which is a premium cable channel, but it didn't have the reach or the distribution of HBO or Starz, that one of the head guys from Epix, I don't have a television. I haven't had a television in like 5 years. When I moved out here, I wasn't sure how long I was going to stay, and I just stayed, and I learned, so I became a cord cutter, and I became an honorary millennial. But even the guy that was the head of programming at Epix didn't have a television, and he was brought on in a way to teach the network about online. And our show was heavily promoted through free trials and things like that, but because of the way that it caught on now, Comcast and DirecTV, who for years did not want to carry Epix, are carrying Epix, and they're going to be carrying Epix before our season 2 premieres in the fall. So I thought that was kind of a reverse, I guess, because usually we talk about the aftermarket when we talk about digital, but in our case, digital drove the cable providers to carry our channel. They could see how much it was being, consumed digitally, and people were signing up for free trials over and over again to try to see the show. And it had been a number of years that Comcast had flatly just said, we're not going to carry Epix, but we changed their minds. So I'm very excited about that.
Now, that's going to have to be the last word. I hope that you all noticed that there is a predominance of women on this panel. You're welcome. Not something you will see very much at these conferences, but these were amazing women. And Dawn. Please say thank you to everyone and have a great time at the rest of Digital Hollywood.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks, Catherine.